Good afternoon, everyone. Well, thanks for a very exciting morning, and to all of the partners that we have here. I hope the morning sessions were very educational and giving you a lot of good opportunities to move organizations forward. I want to thank the Clinton School of Public Service for co-hosting this session. We're certainly glad to be a wonderful partner in the School of Public Service and their lecture series. And I'm particularly excited to have asked my friend, the Mayor of New Orleans, Mayor Mitch Landrieu, to come and give our keynote speech at this summit today. Certainly, some of the same issues that we have persevered through and experienced over the last year are some of the same kinds of challenges that Mayor Landrieu and New Orleans have faced. In fact, they faced them early on, and back in 2012, Mayor Landrieu initiated what was called NOLA for Life. And being a smart mayor like I am, I know that there's good ideas everywhere, and if you can steal some ideas, you should. So I called him up one day and I said, Mitch, we had a bit of a problem with some shootings up here, and where I want to launch a program, and I've been looking for a different name, and I keep coming back to the idea for life, the importance of life as it relates to our young people. And I said, you mind if I steal it? And he said, no, go right ahead. So I know you saw the Little Rock for Life being held up. The name is the same, but a lot of the components are different, but they're all similar in nature in terms of knowing that while law enforcement is certainly one way to try and address this issue, it's multifaceted. We know that the long-term issues are rooted in making our communities better, our neighborhoods better. They're rooted in education and opportunity and taking care of our children. And those kinds of things, a good job and a good education, we know are the things that ultimately are going to improve the entire community. And I know that Mayor Landrieu has done that. He is the 61st mayor of New Orleans, and was elected on May 3rd of 2010, and certainly came into that office with a clear mandate around trying to deal with the devastation of Hurricane Katrina and the BP oil spill, and distinguished himself in helping to try and take care of the citizens of New Orleans as it relates to those two tragic incidents. He was overwhelmingly elected in 2014. They have these interesting election dates, February 1st of 2014. Nowhere else in the country do they elect anybody in February, but. So he was reelected to a second term in 2014, and will be finishing up his second term here in May of this year. And under his leadership, New Orleans continues to grow. It's one of the great American cities in our country, adding over 15,000 new jobs since he was elected mayor. Home values are up 50%. The unemployment rate is below the national average. And a very important thing that we share in common, and that's figuring out how to deal with the issue of blight reduction and coming up with a strategy to try and improve our neighborhoods. Retail is booming with $6 billion in new private investment. And I think obviously facing many challenges in a social context. Mayor Landrieu recently, a couple of weeks ago, was awarded, or will be awarded in May, the John F. Kennedy Profile Encourage Award. Let's give him a hand. For removing 4 Confederate statues from their places of prominence in the city of New Orleans. He went through 2 years of all sorts of arguments, not only in the city hall, but in the courthouses of New Orleans, and ultimately prevailed. He tells me there's somewhere in some vault somewhere, and only he has the key. But he wrote a book about it, so I would encourage you to read about it. It'll tell you the saga of leadership that Mayor Landrieu executed as it relates to that issue. It's called In the Shadow of the Statutes. So if you would, we've gotten to know each other, obviously, through our work as mayors in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. and he is currently the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. I'm happy to share some time with him as the president of the National League of Cities as well. So we're lucky to have him here. He has demonstrated great leadership not only in the city of New Orleans, but nationwide, representing America's voice on the people, to the people who are closest to your mayors. If you would, please give me a warm welcome in greeting Mayor Mitch Landrieu.
Oh, man. Thank you. Thank all of you. I really appreciate that. I was thinking about a couple of things while your great mayor was introducing me, and I wrote this book. And when you write a book, you need to go on a tour, like around to see if, so, encourage people to buy it. And they had me on this tour up in the Northeast. You know where that is? And then from there, you go up there and you get off a plane and you run into like Philadelphia, and they run you in this library and you give a talk and people ask you questions, and you run down and you go to New York, and then you go up to Boston, and then you get in a plane and you run over to Los Angeles, and you're in the back of this dark place, and you go out, and then you're on the Bill Maher show or something like that, and then you answer a bunch of questions, and you run out and you go do something else. And in the meantime, you're passing by lots of people and they don't recognize you, And I was kind of missing home because I'm from New Orleans. I'm a Southern boy. And I didn't realize I really got home because I've been traveling until I came here and somebody said, "How you doing, baby?" "Where you at, sugar sweet?" And I went, "Lord have mercy, I'm home." And I feel good about it. So it's nice to see you. The mayor was teasing us about our election day. Don't get mad at us about our election day. How do y'all think I got elected? This is what happened. This is what happens. This is the truth. My hand to God. We say God. Y'all might say God, but we say God. That the Saints had decided that they were going to win the Super Bowl. And they actually had the Super Bowl on the day that I was getting elected. And so nobody was paying attention to who the heck was running. Now, I want you to listen to me. I got more votes than anybody's ever gotten who's run for mayor forever. But nobody cared. The next day, on the front page of the paper, this is the truth. Whole big old piece of paper, pretty Drew Brees, with that little scar on his cheek that all you girls like. Right there, thinking, oh, look how cute he looks. And then way down on the bottom, like a little bitty box, it said, "Oh, and by the way, Mitch got elected mayor." That's how that happened. I'm not kidding you. Mark, it's great to see you. Y'all got a great mayor. Y'all need to give your mayor a round of applause. He's good. He's a good guy. He's a really good guy, and he's a great mayor. And he leads an organization that's actually bigger than mine. I thought I was kind of hot pants, like my grandma would say, because I was the president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And, so I've got 1,400 mayors with cities 30,000 or more. He got 4,000 people in his organization, and he's the president. So he's a big shot, and y'all ought to treat him like that. And he does a great job. He did call me and steal my stuff, though. He absolutely called me. He said, "We're having an issue." And mayors do this, and we do this lovingly with each other. And cities across America right now are the laboratories for innovation and change. And Washington's stuck. Washington's broken. You know that. I'll talk a little bit about it in my speech. But where things are really happening is on the ground with you, the practitioners, who actually know what's going on. And you're creating new things, new ways to solve old problems, which is critically important. And I know it's hard. I know it gets frustrating. I know you think you're getting beat down, but you keep beating on that wall. And the wall, I'll talk about another wall in a little while. But are y'all paying attention? Don't go to sleep on me. We are going to find a way out of it. And as I was thinking about it, I was talking to Skip a little bit earlier, and Skip, thank you for having us here, of course, and Anthony Smithers with Cities United, thank you as well. I was thinking about sometimes how hard it is and how frustrated it gets, and it reminded me of a story that Mark and I were telling, and I was asking him how it was going, and he said, it's hard being the mayor. And he said, but I wasn't feeling well, so I went to my doctor, and I was complaining. And he said, well, Mark, what's wrong? He said, I get up in the morning, I try to get to the office, but I got to go to the cleaners first, and I'm running into my constituents who are mad at me because they got too many potholes, or the street lights are not working, or something. Somebody got a ticket, and they're just on me like gravy on rice. And during the day, my staff is on me. My chief of staff is bothering me to death all day. And then my wife and my kids and the dog, and he said, well, look, don't worry about all that stuff. He said, I need you to do me a favor. You need to calm yourself down. You're not having a heart attack. You're not going to die. But what I do need you to do is I want you to walk about 5 miles, 10 miles a day, do it for 30 days, and come back and tell me how you're feeling. And he said, but I don't have time to do that. I'm the mayor of the city. I'm busy. So Mark, just do what I'm telling you. Call me back and let me know how you're doing. So 30 days later, he calls the doctor. The doctor says, Mark, how you doing? He says, I'm doing great. He goes, well, I mean, how things? He goes, they've never been better in my whole life. And he said, well, did you do exactly what I told you to do? He goes, yeah, for the last 30 days, I walked 10 miles a day. I've never done that in my life, and I just feel like a new person. He said, well, that's beautiful. He said, how things back, at work, and how things with the wife and the kids and all of that kind of stuff. He goes, how the hell would I know? I'm 300 miles away from those people. I hope y'all know that's kind of a joke. I tell that story, for this reason, is that you cannot, no matter how hard things get, no matter how tough they get, you can't run away from the problem. If you want to fix what's wrong in your neighborhood, in your city, in your state, in your country, you got to have to kind of run to the fire, and you have to see the truth, and you got to tell the truth. And so I want to talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to talk a little while at you, and then we're going to have a question and answer session in just a bit. But I want to tell you that on May 29th, 2012, that was the worst day in my 30 years public service. 16 years of legislator, 6 lieutenant governor, 8 now running a spectacular city. And that was the day that a little 5-year-old girl named Breonna Allen was killed. You see, she was at her cousin's 10th birthday party on her grandma's porch. You can envision this. Families out there, lots of food, lots of beautiful balloons, everybody's hanging out. There's nothing but beautiful things happening in the world. But a couple of teenagers who wanted to kill somebody were driving by, and they pulled out an AK-47 and they strafed the porch with it because they were trying to hit somebody, but they missed their target, who was her father. And the bullet ripped through Breonna's gut, and all her father could do was hold little Breonna in his hands. Blood was pooling underneath her. The Times-Picayune got actually a picture of it, and you can't take the picture out of your mind. A bullet also went down the street about 200 yards, and a woman named Tawana Pierce just happened to be turning the corner to bring in a rental car back, and it pierced the windshield and hit her right in the head and killed her and leaving her with 2 little babies. That day, it's a horrifying scene. When you witness such a senseless act of violence, everything stops. You gasp in the horror. Life has changed irrevocably for so many of us. But here's the thing, the violence didn't stop for Breonna Allen's family. In fact, I'm going to tell you a bit of the rest of the story. Breonna's father, who was the target that day, was soon arrested for another murder that he committed. He's now serving life behind bars. Meanwhile, Breonna's uncle would be dead within a year, ambushed by 2 other men with assault rifles. Now, you would think that would be enough for this story, but that's really just the beginning. Because, yeah, that's right, Lord have mercy. Because the epilogue of this story is actually the prologue, and it's about her cousin, Kennard, whose birthday it was that day. See, on that day, one of those bullets that interrupted his birthday party grazed his cheek and neck area. But for the grace of God, he survived that gunshot wound that day, but not the violence that was all around him. 5 months later, Kennard's father was stabbed by his stepmother. And then, I'm not finished yet. And then, nearly a year to the day, Kennard was once again caught in a crossfire. This time, a bullet grazed his leg, and 18 others were shot that day during a Mother's Day, second line, that's a little dance we do, celebration in a neighborhood. So twice in a year, before the age of 12, he came within inches to getting his head blown off, and he lost incalculable numbers of family members. Now, this question is not answered the same way in every room that you go in, or what school you go in, but if you ask the kids to raise their hand and ask if they know anybody that's been shot, some rooms no hands go up. In the other room, everybody's hand goes up. Violence, guns, politics, policy have been intertwined with my life since I was a baby boy. In 1973, 45 years ago, when I was in 7th grade, my father, who was the mayor at the time, was called on a Sunday morning by 10 o'clock. He was not at home because he was in a retreat with his top staff across the lake, but he was told that there was a sniper on the roof of the Howard Johnsons. His name was Mark Essex, Vietnam veteran. First instance of terror that we saw on the streets of America that we now see too many times, back in 1973 in New Orleans. My father rushed home, gathered his things, and being the little aggravating kid that I am, I jumped in the back of the car. I did. And he didn't know it. And he went down to City Hall. The hotel was right across the street from the mayor's office, where my office is today. And this little 13-year-old, for a couple of days, watched this guy, Mark Essex, shoot police officers and firefighters off of ladders and kill other folks. I saw firsthand the toll that violence has taken on the families and the community. And about the same time that year, I was the victim of an armed robbery. Y'all have time savers here? You have easy serves? Little corner drugstore where if you're playing basketball in your friend's house and you're on the way home and you want to pick up an icy and, get a Butterfinger that you like, or Nestle's Crunch or whatever y'all eat. Y'all got that here, right? Y'all got Kit Kats too? Yeah, we live in the same country. All right. So on the way home, I walk in and there's a guy robbing it, and he points a gun at my head and says, you shouldn't have come in here, little one. And I can remember that steel revolver. I can see it, like right now. I can see it in my mind's eye. It was very big and it was very blue. That's all I remember, and the hole was perfect. I couldn't have imagined that 45 years later, I'd be in the final month of a 30-year career that would put me in the same office where I watched my father deal with that shooter. And as mayor of the great city of New Orleans, I feel 100% responsible for creating a city of peace so that a 13-year-old never feels threatened as I did in that convenience store that day. And from my days as an interested child to my time as the chief executive responsible for leading a great American city, back from untold devastation that Katrina visited upon us, I remain, notwithstanding, faithful to the goodness of our people, the resilience of our country, and the ability to solve this seemingly unsolvable problem of violence in our lives. I still believe in the promise of our great democracy to provide a true blanket of security for those who have been left behind, those who are left out in the cold but who soldier on in their belief that there is a better day. I have stood witness to the faith and courage of families that have faced terror and heartbreak and devastation that would cripple most of us. Unfortunately, our democracy is not working right now for everybody, not for them, not for anybody. We have become, in my opinion, blind and numb to the truth of what's happening in the communities across this country. Instead, focusing on chaos, manufactured chaos, that rules the politics of our day, allowing dysfunction to further sow division, anxiety, and despair, to frustrate progress, to make us weaker globally, and really less secure in our homes and communities, not more secure. And at the end of the day, basically to steal our future, robbing every family in this country of the basic and most fundamental principles and promises of our democracy. The promise that every father and mother should be able to live in a safe community with the dignity that comes from being able to provide for their families. The promise every child offers when he or she shows up at school each day, working hard for a future no matter how challenging their situation may be or how stacked the odds are against them. The undeniable American promise that regardless of your race, of your gender, of your sexual orientation, of your faith, geography, or economic situation, that if you work hard, if you treat others with respect and look out for your community, you're going to be rewarded with a more secure future. And as we stand here today, what I would ask each of you is, can we honestly say that we are keeping this promise to each other? Can any of us explain today the culture of violence that courses through our communities? Does anybody understand why it's so easy for a young man to bring an assault weapon to a place of worship, to a movie theater, a school, or spray bullets upon innocent children, or why so many young men feel such hopelessness and anger that a scuffed shoe, a sideways look, or any other petty beef causes them to pick up a gun and end the life of another human being, much less somebody that they know, that they grew up with. It is hard not to be angry when you think about where we are right now in our country, divided by partisanship, angered over the anxiety and the chaos that rules the day, and frustrated that the institutions that are supposed to protect us have weakened on our watch and get weaker every day. But it is also too important to recognize that our greatest moments in this country come from the hope of those that are the most vulnerable, who said enough was enough and who demanded change. From our youth who said enough is enough, it's our time to shape our future. In the 1960s, it was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee that led peaceful protests, trained volunteers, fueled the civil rights movement to reject white supremacy. And their chairman at the day, a young man named John Lewis, said that causing good trouble would provoke, challenge, and peacefully agitate the unacceptable status quo in order to move progress forward. From civil rights to peace protests during the Vietnam era to the young disruptors of today, we should listen to those young voices, our next generation of leaders who are saying, help us build a better future for this country. And like so many, no matter how despondent I feel, I get energized by the poise and the passion of these young teens. Parkland, Florida, those that are across America who are assuming the mantle of leadership because the adults will not lead. And so they must, to preserve their lives, themselves, and they're going to make us better, to force a conversation, We're the ones who are supposed to be having conversations with them. They're now having a conversation with us because we won't hear, we won't see, we won't listen what's in front of us. We have to be heard on the issues of guns and violence. So even with the lack of federal action for everyday tragedy and everyone that has come before us, Sandy Hook, Orlando, Las Vegas, Lafayette, Louisiana, Columbine, Aurora, Virginia Tech, Fort Hood, the Washington Navy Yard, Sutherland Springs, San Ysidro, San Bernardino, the targeted police shootings in Baton Rouge and Dallas, and the list goes on and on and on and on. So many others. Even after these tragedies and so many more, we should and we must remain hopeful because we have to win. This is not something that we can lose because really and literally our lives and the lives of our children depend on it. Hopeful that this time our country's leaders are going to stand with the vast majority of Americans who agree with this very simple premise. Not every American needs access to every kind of weapon at any time to do anything they want. I want you to think about that. Let me say that again. And 97% of Americans agree on this. Not every American needs any kind of gun at any time to do whatever they want. And then to find the practical and evidence-based solutions based on facts and rights that are going to further stem this epidemic of violence in our country that is caused when the wrong people have access to the wrong guns at the wrong time that are designed to kill. That's fairly simple and common sense. I come from a city that knows what it means to survive a tragedy that required a national response from the federal government. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And I want to say to those in every other community that's experienced a mass shooting that the journey will not be easy, but there are many good souls who stand with you and with us, inextricably linked together when it comes to fighting common sense solutions that make all of us safer. But I also want to say, very respectfully and with great care, that focusing on mass tragedies alone is not going to be enough. And it's not going to get us to the core of the neglect and the malfeasance that's gotten us to this point in America. Now, here's where it gets difficult for all of us. We heard the teens who led the March of Our Lives talk about this aspect as well. When they were defending themselves, they were thinking about other people. That's worth thinking about too, adults, because we seem to have forgotten how to do that too. And I'm glad they talked about it. So if we're going to survive as a people, we have to rip this Band-Aid off and talk about the stories that don't get the same media attention when the killing field is not a school or a movie theater and the victims are not suburban and white. You see, when the killing field is a park, when it's a playground, a bus stop, the middle of the street, or the front porch of your grandma's home while you're celebrating your cousin's birthday, I want you all to think about that, who have never been anywhere around that potential threat the next time you have a party for your grandchild. I want you to think about that and how much you take for granted in some neighborhoods in America. The hurt and the despair is the same to the families who are left to pick up the pieces, whether it's a mass shooting or an isolated but continuous event throughout our country. If we're going to address the culture of violence in this country, we kind of have to understand the culture in the country, because culture is forever changing. Behavioral patterns form time after time after time, some good, some bad. Second line is good, unless somebody's shooting in it. We need to start to see ourselves in those who don't look like us, who don't live in the same neighborhoods as us. We need to acknowledge that although we've made stunning progress, we have a long way to go. On the same day of that senseless tragedy in Parkland, on that day, and on just that day, not the other 364, in communities across the country, I want to talk to you about other things that happen. In my city, I'll go first. In a 24-hour period between February 13th and the 14th, while we were finishing our Mardi Gras celebration, 4 of our citizens were fatally shot and 3 were injured. In Chicago, on February 13th, a police commander responding to a call was shot and killed. In North Hollywood, Los Angeles, 1 person was murdered and another hospitalized in what authorities reported was a likely gang-related shooting. In Philadelphia, on February 14th, a 26-year-old man was shot in the head twice, in the shoulder, once in the arm. A 24-year-old man was shot twice in the arm, and later that night, in a separate incident, a 48-year-old man was shot in the left side of his face and his arm, and a 20-year-old man was shot once in the face. Now, while shocking to some, mostly numbing to others, to my fellow mayors and to our police departments, this has come to be normal, everyday behavior to be expected. This deadly violence with us every day, every minute, like the clock, ticking, sure to come. All too often, I get the call from our police chief. Get it all the time. Mr. Mayor, I regret to inform you that last night there was an incident where shots rang out. We arrived at the scene. When we got there, more often than not, young African-American man laying face down, pool of blood around his head. He's dead. There are no witnesses. Now, mayors go out to scenes like this. Mark knows this. You ever seen a young person with his head blown off, with his eyes open and his tongue hanging out on the ground? It's a startling sight. You know who else sees that? Every child that lives in that neighborhood. Every child that lives in that neighborhood. Sometimes the police cars come and they don't have enough barricades in the back of their car to cover it because they went to another shooting, and so the body lays there, a lifeless body, somebody who lived in that neighborhood that people knew, and the kids see the death over and over and over again. And the media goes through the motions, which frames our thinking and discussion. A murder or a shooting or an armed robbery or rape means 90 seconds at the top of the hour. Footage of crime scene tape, maybe a security camera photo, a mugshot, a brief interview with a neighbor or friend expressing outrage and saying, "Oh, Lord, have mercy, this has got to stop. I'll extend my prayers and condolences." Hype about a violence wave or a crime spree. And then that's it. We're done, 90 seconds in and out. No broader context, no further discussion about anything. Basically, what has become wallpaper in the soundtrack of our lives, always in the background, never really noticed, not something you stop at anymore. A promise unfulfilled, a story not finished, a lesson ignored because we turn to whatever is next in our lives or anything that's easier to see or easier to hear. And left behind is another neighborhood full of families left to pick up the pieces, left to try to understand why anyone who is not a soldier of war would have access to a weapon of war an AK-47, an AR-15, or any other weapon for that matter, capable of killing innocent people at a rate faster than it takes to type a 280-character tweet and hit send. Are you listening to me? I've been called too often in my time as mayor to make sense out of senseless violence, and I can tell you there is no answer that will free a compassionate soul from the burden and the anguish in our country as a result of this senseless violence. In the last 8 years, I have been to too many funerals. I have held mothers and fathers, parents who have lost a child to this unnatural and unnecessary violence. I have held children trying to get through the pain of burying a father, a mother, an aunt, an uncle, a cousin, a teammate, a brother, a sister. I have seen a police officer with a bullet hole in his head in the emergency room who was dead on arrival and buried that same person, trying to hold up his wife who can't bear the weight that's on her weak knees while her baby daughter stands next to her trying to figure out what the heck happened and what she's going to do, not even understanding that her daddy is never, ever, ever coming back. Every one of them asking through their tears, same question is universal. Why? 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 Why did this have to happen? Well, here's the thing, it doesn't have to happen, and it shouldn't happen. I think about these kids every day. I think about the families who are hurting and the culture and the environment that's holding them back, denying too many their role in the future of our country, denying all of us the potential that we will never know. I want you to think about this. If every person really matters, and if every person is valuable and adds something, then the absence of that person, by definition, has to be a tremendous loss. Have you ever thought how much we have lost? Dr. King, assassinated by somebody with a rifle. John F. Kennedy, assassinated by somebody with a rifle. Robert Kennedy, assassinated with a rifle. Does anybody sit and wonder what could have been or what might have been when we lost a piece of our soul in that decade, and how many more things we've lost like that? If the presence of a human being changes the world, the absence of a human being has to change the world as well. And we walk by it like we've lost nothing and act like it's all okay. It's not. Swallowed up by a cycle of violence, it came and went so fast, it's almost like a dream, sometimes like a nightmare, unexplained and unrepentant in the damage and the hurt that it causes. Now, I want you to listen to these statistics because someone's trying to distract you. Someone's trying to tell you that there are hordes of immigrants marching to your shore to come and rape and pillage your wife and your neighbors. And by the way, they're holding those weapons of mass destruction that we couldn't find in Iraq. And they found a way to get here, and 3 million of them voted illegally in an election and elected people that we did not want. That's kind of the story. Can't you piece that together? I mean, of course that's happening, right? And there's nothing else happening in America. Well, as you're focused on that fear and that anxiety, that those people are coming to take your stuff and hurt you, so let's just hate them, and by the way, be mad at each other, and don't look at me and don't even think about asking where Russia is. Because I can see it from my kitchen. This craziness, are y'all the only ones that think this is cray-cray? I want you to listen to what I'm going to tell you now. These are statistics. Like in New Orleans, they say, I'm facking you. All right? On an average day, 96 Americans are killed on the streets of America with guns, almost always by somebody that they know, and that would be other Americans. Citizens, fellow American citizens. There are approximately 13,000 gun homicides a year in the United States. For every person killed with guns, there are 2 more that are injured, which means after the killings, the shootings are exponentially higher. And they hurt, like they blow people's arms off or legs, and they can't walk, and then people are in wheelchairs. The damage is catastrophic. 7 children and teens are killed with guns in the United States on average every day. So that would be today. 96 people today. When you go home tonight and you're watching whatever you watch, and then you turn on the Masters and watch that beautiful putt, or Sergio Garcia just having a really bad day, 96 people, okay? In an average month, 50 women are shot to death by intimate partners in the United States. Black men in the United States of America. Let me say this again. Black men in the United States of America between the ages of 15 and 26 are 13 times more likely than white men to be shot and killed by guns by people who know them. Beyond the human costs, I want you to think about this. Conservative estimates are that gun violence costs the American economy at least $229 billion every year. $229 billion every year. When you add up the expenses that can be directly measured, including health care costs, law enforcement, criminal justice expenses. And then write this down and check it. Since 1980, 630,000 American citizens have been killed in the United States with guns in America. That is more American soldiers that have been killed in all, can you spell all? All of the wars in the 20th and the 21st century. I'm just saying. You might want to think about that. I want you to think about what a great country we could be if we were spending those tax dollars on education, infrastructure, job training, healthcare, mental health services, addiction treatment, services that really mattered, or better yet, the kind of things that would stop people from even having to use any one of the things that I just said. According to research conducted by a professor at the University of Massachusetts, during the 20 years between 1994 and 2004, when the assault weapons ban was in place, there were 12 gun massacre incidents resulting in 89 deaths. 20 years. 12, 89. You got it? Since 2004, there have been 34 incidents after the ban went away that have resulted in 302 deaths. Some people might see a correlation there. You might want to think about it. What if we could cut the number of mass shootings by 2/3 by banning weapons of war? What if that cut the $229 billion a similar year? What would be billions spent on the things that would help create a better life for our families? In my city of New Orleans, we've been working, as the mayor said, every day on this issue. We launched NOLA for Life, which is a comprehensive murder reduction strategy, and we called it that, Mayor. You're exactly right, and you were right to take that name, so that we could value life. Because this is what people are talking about, value life from beginning to end. Not just like way over here, but like the whole thing. And that everybody's life matters all the time. And that if life is valuable, then we ought to invest in it and we ought to protect it. And it is an essential component, especially for those of us that speak in the language of life. It's an important one to remind people of when they throw stuff at you, but they won't listen to anything that you say. Our plan focuses on prevention, intervention, enforcement, rehabilitation, and importantly, it recognizes that violence is a public health threat, just like it is a public safety threat. In the program's first 6 years, our murder rate's gone down 30%. Now, we've also spent $60 million a year on jail, about the same that we spend in the general fund on the Department of Public Works, Criminal Court, District Attorney, and the Recreation Department combined, which is I'm spending a lot more money holding people up in jail and not nearly enough money teaching kids how to swim, or teaching kids STEM, or teaching kids music, which is what they need to make us better people. Every mayor or city council can give you similar figures. Local governments are doing everything they can to treat the symptoms of this national disease. So here is where we have to take a lesson from the teens across this country who are using their pain, their anxiety, their courage to lead us into a better future, to restore the promise of a safe and secure community, to cause action, do something. Talk is cheap. You've heard this before. Don't talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. It's a hell of a thing to be called into purpose by your child. We're supposed to be the adults. So what are we doing? We can do this, we can act, we can start, We can find common ground. Washington, not surprisingly, is going to follow because they're sure not leading. They're stuck. Their truck's in the mud and it's deep. Somebody better try to tow them out. Now, I'm a Southern boy. I hope y'all can tell from my accent. I know I sound like I'm from New York, but I'm really from New Orleans. Everybody here's got an accent. I don't know what's wrong with y'all. I support the Second Amendment. I own guns. I understand the culture of hunting. I understand the traditions that our families have. I understand the need for us to protect our homes in case somebody wants to invade. I got that. But even one of our country's most conservative Supreme Court justices realized in the Heller decision, Scalia, #1 conservative in American jurisprudence, Federalist Society loves this guy, Uncle Nino. That's his nickname, brilliant guy. This is what he said in the Heller decision. He said this. I didn't say this. He said it. Nothing, in our opinion, should be taken to cast doubt on the long-standing prohibitions on the possession of firearms by felons and the mentally ill, or laws forbidding the carrying of firearms in sensitive places such as schools and government buildings, or laws imposing conditions on the commercial sale of arms. Not everybody needs every kind of gun at any time to do whatever they want, wherever they want. And Justice Scalia said that you can be a supporter of the Second Amendment and still believe in common sense gun laws that every responsible gun owner in here knows when we go out in the woods how we have to handle our business. And that seems to me to be some place where we can find common ground. You see, in the Constitution, for those of you that know a bit about it and study it, the Founding Fathers and their genius was that strung throughout the entire Constitution in all of the Bill of Rights is this very simple thing. Every time there is a right, there is a balance with corresponding responsibility to exercise that right in a way that doesn't harm your fellow citizen. It's in every string of the entire Constitution, particularly in the Bill of Rights. And by the way, the Second Amendment is the Second Amendment. It's not the First Amendment, because the First Amendment was first. Now, you might want to ask yourself why the First Amendment was first. Because maybe they thought it should come first. The right to a free press. The right to freely assemble. This is a good one. I like this one a lot. The right to redress your grievances against the government. I remember asking my teacher what that means. She goes, you'll find out one day. And you'll like it. And she's exactly right, because that's who separates us, sets us apart. That's why facts matter. That's why the government doesn't control the media. That's what freedom relies on, that First Amendment. But you know what? The First Amendment's not absolute either. Not even the First Amendment, the most important one. Every one of the rights in the First Amendment is tempered by the responsibility to act right. You cannot go yell fire in a theater because it's going to harm other people. You can redress your grievances against the government, but you can only do it within the right time, manner, and reasonable restrictions, because where every right, there is responsibility. So I ask common sense human beings, what is it about the Second Amendment that makes it unassailable? The Fourth Amendment of unreasonable search and seizure has limitations on it. The Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination, every one of them does. So why in the world would the Second Amendment be the only one that is not subject to the same kinds of balances that every other amendment is? And so common sense folks like us from the South that believe in guns and know what it's like to hunt and teach our kids what that culture is like, especially after Thanksgiving, when you're trying to eat that turkey sandwich at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, but you want to go hunting the next day for ducks. I'm not going to argue who's got better duck hunting in Louisiana or Arkansas, but I'm going to leave that alone because I know where I am. You understand what I'm trying to say to you, that we can find common ground that responsible people who believe in the Constitution and who are patriots love. This should not be hard for us. And as a matter of fact, not a long time ago, not a very long time ago, the National Rifle Association agreed with this. And so now I just gave you a lot of facts, and I gave you the law. And if you went to law school, you know that you have to apply the facts to the law. And you usually come up with a pretty good answer after that. And that's why I believe we can find common sense solutions. And here are a couple of them. Banning bump stocks, fixing the background checks to make sure people that get guns get clean when they get them, closing the gun show loophole. All of those are good starts. And I'm glad that Congress took the much needed action recently in the budget deal, taking the first step. This seems like something we ought to all agree on, that if we want to know about something, we ought to try to learn about it. You think about this, you ever go to history class and the teacher said you don't need to read the book? Has that ever happened before, that you've gone to class and they didn't give you a book? And what's in the book is research, because other people looked at this, they took the research and they taught you what was. Anybody in their family that had cancer? You figure this out really quickly. The first thing you want to know is who knows the most about this? And how do they know about it? And before you inject that poison into my daughter's body, can you tell me how many times y'all researched that, and do you know what's going to happen? You know why? Because we don't do anything in this country without doing research except one thing. Except one thing, violence. I just told you that 630,000 American citizens were killed. Do you know what they do at the War College every day? They go back and they research every war that was fought in the history of the world. They research the best weaponry. They apply the weaponry to the war. And then they come up with a new strategy to fight the new menace of the day. That's what they do every day to protect us. So can you explain to me why, when it comes to violence on the streets of America, we don't do any research about this? Does that sound like malfeasance to you? Does it sound like an insane way to protect yourself? And when you ask about it, they say they don't have any money. I don't know. We could talk about that for a minute. But I would say that you got to tackle this problem. And it's true, it's not just about guns. But you do know it's stupid to say that guns don't kill people. People kill people. You realize that that's just stupid. I mean, it's just stupid. I want you to think about it. I don't mean to call you, you know what I'm saying. I'm not. I want you to think about that, because we get into these slogans and we act like, well, that's true. Okay, let me try this one on you. Up is down. Up is down. If I keep saying it over and over, y'all run out of here going, up is down. He said up is down. I trust him. Up must be down. Until some kid says to you, well, no, Mr. Up is really up. And down is down. You can't say guns don't kill people. They were designed to kill people. An AK-47, the purpose of its design was to kill people. So can we just start saying a gun was designed to kill people, but if someone uses it appropriately for protection, you might not use it for that? But let's not kind of go into this fantasy land about guns don't kill people. People use guns to kill people. Both of those things can be true. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. Yeah, they kill them with guns. So guns kill people. So we can at least agree on that half of the equation. And let's stop saying silly things that we know not to be true. Now, we can argue about whether people should have the ability to use guns to kill people, but don't say guns don't kill people. That's just stupid. At least in my neighborhood, that's what we would say about it. I don't mean any disrespect to anybody in here. Comprehensive mental health reform, substance abuse reform, criminal justice reform, enforcing the laws that we have now, better technology and communication between federal, state, and local authorities, really figuring out how to get on the front end, not just on the back end. All of those things, if we were fighting a war, we wouldn't just go say, let's just talk about guns. Let's talk about everything, but let's not talk about that as well. And so we have to demand more from Washington, and here's the only thing. You gotta do research. And you have to treat it for what it is, public safety and public health. If you start thinking about that, you bring local law enforcement. You used to be a U.S. attorney, DA, you know this. And work together and think about it and go back and find out where we made mistakes. If it's really important to us, we're going to fix the problem. We're going to fix the problem. You know why? Because we're Americans. And that's what we do. And we shouldn't run away from problems because they offend our sense of ideology. We need to fix the problem. See, that's what mayors do. We don't get stuck on stupid. We do not get stuck on stupid. You don't let us get stuck on stupid. You know why I know that? Because I'm a mayor. And by the time I get myself out of my house in the morning and get my kids off to school and go get milk so they can have milk for their Frosty Flakes when they get home, you are up on me like gravy on rice before I get to the cash register about what's wrong in your life. Or when I go to the cleaners, you know that. So we can't get stuck. We got to come up with an answer. And so Congress has got to work on those 3 or 4 things that I talked about, and then they have to develop a consensus around this issue. We have to recognize the impact that gun violence has on victims. We have to understand domestic abuse. We have to strengthen the laws that require domestic abusers to relinquish firearms. We've got to treat violence, in particular, the extreme use of guns on the streets of America, as the public safety and public health threat that it is, especially in minority communities across the country that don't have a big voice throughout the United States of America. The only excuse to do nothing is politics. There's nobody that I know in a position of leadership who truly wants to do the right thing and would choose to do nothing after understanding the real facts, which is probably why we don't want to talk about what the real facts are, and you want to walk by it like it's not happened. Walk by it every day and don't see it, just like I walked by those Confederate statues and never thought a cent about them until my friend Went Marcella said, hey man, you need to wake yourself up. And then you need to stay woke. Is it true? The most damning thing that white people told me about those Confederate statues, and they thought this was good. We struggle sometimes. They said to me, man, why are you doing that, man? Why you rattling that nest? I don't know anybody that's offended by those statues. I said, that's exactly right. You don't know anybody that's offended by those statues. Maybe you need to get some new friends. You think about what I'm telling you. Now, why am I so sure? Why do I have so much confidence in you and the American people and the people of Little Rock and New Orleans to get this right? Because we've gotten it right before. It's kind of an open book test. You're starting to see the rhythm here. Let's not do any homework. Let's not really use the book to take the test when it's like all sit there right in front of you just because you want to ignore something. I want you to think about this. After September 11th, when maybe the worst tragedy that's happened to the United States of America occurred, and all of us thought our country was going to be taken from us, our patriotism was shaken, our self-confidence was shaken. When we took a minute, got our feet back on the ground, President Bush rose us up when he was standing on top of that rubble. We decided to do something about it and protect ourselves and say never again. You know what we did? We found trillions of dollars, like right away, that we spent prosecuting the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and gave our soldiers what we thought they needed to protect our freedom. I mean, like that. Whatever you thought about those wars, one thing you can't debate is we found the money right away to go fight because we thought we were going to protect ourselves. Out of whole cloth, like right away. We created the Department of Homeland Security. Y'all know those TSA agents that y'all love so much? That just look at you in a loving way when you come in through, say, come on through. And you're going, oh, I hope I don't get stopped. And they put that, you're the random person, and you go, oh, hell. You know those people? Who I like, by the way. I think they do a great job. We hired 60,000 TSA agents, like overnight. You know the Department of Homeland Security that you see on TV every day? Every day now in our life. We don't do anything without the Department of... We created that out of whole cloth after September 11th. You know why? Because we felt threatened and we wanted to protect ourselves. We didn't say, how much is it going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? Without judging any of these choices that were made about the wars or TSA, I want to ask yourself, why is it so easy for the President and Congress to find the money in the budget to keep us safe from foreign terrorists, which is an important need, but impossible for them to even come together to talk about the culture of violence that's terrorizing our neighborhoods? We just enacted a $1 trillion tax cut. In other words, we found $1 trillion that we didn't need. No, we did. And we said it's better for people to have it, arguably true. But if you can move $1 trillion that fast, you would have to say, as a matter of public policy, you thought the tax cut was more important than saving lives, because that's what that was. That was a choice. We could argue about whether it was a good choice or not, but it was clearly a choice. But the answer was we couldn't find the money. That wasn't the answer. We found $56 billion to plus up the military because we think it's important for us to protect ourselves in potential conflicts, which may be correct. But we found the $56 billion, which means that we think that that's more important than ending the violence on the streets of America. We want $25 billion more for a wall that we think is going to help keep us safe. But it's not, and you can say what you want about the choice, but it's not because we couldn't find the money. So what conclusion, now that I've told you about the facts, Now that I've told you about the law, now that I've told you about the actions, what conclusion, if you were a young black kid in an urban center and there was a bullet pointing at your head, what conclusion would you draw about the facts, the law, and the choices that we have made as the United States of America? If you were one of the kids at Parkland, what conclusion would you draw? If you were in Las Vegas and you were one of the victims of that mass shooting, what conclusion would you draw? Well, here's the one I draw. It's not a priority. I mean, that's all I'm saying. You can argue whether it should be or not, but it's not like we don't know the answer. It's not like we don't have the money. It's not like the facts and the circumstances, empirically verified, based on real research, cannot be proved. So the question would be, why? Or why not? That's a question that's worth pondering, and you should think about it. Between 1995 and 2003, the federal government actually got it right. You see, they supported the federal government, local police departments. They invested $1 billion a year in community policing efforts. But since 2003, that number has decreased year over year by 88%. And today, mayors across the country find themselves at odds with other presidents and this president and the Department of Justice over their efforts just to scapegoat immigrants instead of finding ways to keep our communities safe. Immigrants are criminals. Mexicans are rapists. Be afraid of them. Look at the statistics. Just look at the statistics. I don't even need to finish the sentence. And then take the pain of looking in the mirror and asking yourselves, who's hurting who? Either white or black, in both of those of gun violence, most of the people know each other. Most of the people know each other. And a lot of it's domestically related to a lot of other things. So we ought to be thinking about ourselves as we consider what it takes to be a great country, what actually makes us great. The only excuse that we have right now is politics and vision. And then I would say this: where are our leaders who are driven by faith, who are driven by family, and who are driven by country? I know where they think they are, but I'm asking you, where are they? Everywhere we look in Washington, easy to find an elected official who said they're guided by the values of faith, family, and country, and patriot. I'm a patriot. I'm a person of faith. I'm a broken Catholic and a Christian, so I don't judge anybody. But I hear people using their faith to justify some of their political positions, and I think that's really good, because I think faith's got a really important role in our lives. But here's what I always worried about. The Jesuits trained me, man, so I got this question in mind. I got punished so many times. Sent to PH, penance hall. That's like detention. The Jesuits called it penance hall. Just leave it to them to make you feel bad about getting punished. But the Bible I read teaches that faith without works, I love y'all. Faith without works is dead. Now, I wonder if these politicians in Washington who espouse faith, family, and country as a slogan to make you feel better about them, ever heard of the greatest commandment that I learned when I was a kid? You remember that commandment? You remember the setting? Jesus is in the temple. Pharisees and the Sadducees got him, locked and loaded. They're going to trip him up. Hey, Jesus, what's the greatest commandment? Because he can only say 10 things. There are only 10 answers to that. The first one, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, the fifth one, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But he was operating in like a different place and said, you see that? There y'all go. Getting all strung up on the letter of the law and not really even understanding what it was, but was very gentle and nice because he spoke truth and love, right? That's what it said, it speak truth and love. It didn't say don't tell the truth. It didn't say soft pedal it and don't really say it. He just said say the truth but say it in love. And he said you should love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your soul. And then you should love your neighbor as yourself. Now the Pharisees and the Sadducees were ignorant. And they go, oh, well, okay, well, they didn't understand what just happened to them. And so they said, well, okay, well, let me test it. Who is your neighbor? And of course, he told the parable of the Good Samaritan. Now, you know why there's a Good Samaritan in the story? Because Samaritans were bad. See, they weren't the ones who were supposed to stop. The whole point of it was even if the Samaritan stopped, the other part of the story, who were the other two? The rabbi who was supposed to stop did not stop. You don't understand what I'm saying? So that wasn't even enough to them, because they started questioning, what it meant to love thy neighbor as thyself. What did that really mean? And then finally, it just goes on. And throughout it, you get it. Whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, that's you do unto me. We read the same book. It's the same Bible, right? All right. So what I want to say about that is that whatsoever you do to the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. It's a pretty good way to live. And it's a pretty good governing philosophy as well. So when people start preaching to you about the value of life, you might want to just ask them about the policies that are being enacted. I'm a Catholic. So when we go to church and we're asking for forgiveness, we talk about the things we do and the things we don't do. The truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Not a little bit of the things you do and the things that you don't do. A sin by omission. Like, what don't you do? What don't you see? What do you walk away from? What do you ignore? That's part of the whole program too, for those of us that live in this walk. And so I just would tell my friends in Washington, D.C., when they talk in that talk, just kind of ask yourself, how then, now that you know the facts, now that you know the law, now that you know the impact, now that you know you got money in your pocket, you got a little change in your pocket because you can spend it on ice cream and candy, why you might not be spending it on your paper, your pencil, and your homework. And quit telling me you can't do something when we know you can. Tell me you can't solve a problem when you know the answer already, because it's an open book test, and because I saw you do it before, I know you can do it again. So I would say this, that now is a time that we have to make combating gun violence and murder, along with opioid addiction and the value of human beings in the space that we work in, a national priority. We have to end the drumbeat of death and destruction. Because I'll tell you this, although not all of us in this room, and maybe none of us in this room, are at fault, we're all responsible for figuring out what the problem is. So don't get stuck on relitigating the other 300 years. New Orleans is 300 years old. Y'all can come. I'm a little bit older than y'all, but y'all are welcome to come to our birthday. You don't need to relitigate whose fault the last 300 years are. You just don't. All you got to do is take responsibility for fixing it in the future. Save you a lot of time at the barbershop arguing with somebody about whatever it is, or ladies at the beauty shop. Y'all know what y'all talk about in there. So I would just say this, in this dark moment, let us show what you already know, that resurrection and redemption come from the most unlikely of places. The answer is not going to come from the White House. It's not going to come from the halls of Congress. It's not going to come from the marbled walls of the judiciary at the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., or in Arkansas and Louisiana. It's going to come from the street. If you're going to go from tragedy to triumph, it has to happen right here. And you got to quit waiting on somebody else to bless you. Just go do what you need to do and testify in the way you handle your business, and it will percolate up. And then all of us doing a little bit all at the same time will change the way the country acts. Because right now it feels icky to me. I don't like the way this feels. Y'all feel the same way? I can't even describe it. It just feels like, having a bunch of icky stuff all over you. And that's not who we are as Americans. Knowing demands action. And in this moment, we know what needs to be done. And so we have to overcome our fear. We have to overcome our anxiety. We have to overcome what we think our shortcomings are. That really is a definition of courage. Courage isn't just running out there acting like you bigger and better looking than everybody else when you know you're not. That doesn't take a lot of courage. That's just ignorance. Courage means understanding your fear, knowing that what you're about to do is hard, stepping into a space where you know you're going to get hurt. You want to know what courage looks like? You think about John Lewis. Y'all got this picture in your head when John Lewis was 23 years old, standing there, a little small boy at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, got history on his shoulders, standing there with a big old bad sheriff who's probably got this big old stick in his hand, and he knows he's going to get hit. He knows he's going to get hit. And what does he do? He stands. He stands in purpose. He stands in principle. He's speaking truth in love. And when that guy hit him, the triumph was won. That's what courage is. That's what courage looks like. And so there are no people in America who are more on the front lines of this than you are. And if you think violence is strangling you, and I would argue strenuously that it is, you may not be able to see it, you may not be able to feel it, but one person at a time, it chokes the life out of them, it chokes the spirit out of them, and it chokes the spirit out of your community. We need to demand that we change the culture in this country and decide that we're going to be a country of peace. Country can't be at peace if Little Rock's not at peace. Where there is no justice, there is no peace. What that means is where there's no justice, people are not being treated fairly, they feel alienated from each other, they start turning on each other. They start beating each other up. Does this sound familiar to you? And so we are not at peace. Can you feel that the country's not at peace right now? Can't you feel that a house divided against itself cannot stand, and we're dividing every day when there's higher common ground to be sought and to be found? I think that's the next challenge. And the question is, which one of you is going to rise up and accept it? God bless you, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you all for coming. And now we're going to have a conversation about the bigger picture, bringing shareholders together to solve the problems of violence in America's cities. Mayor Landrieu, I want you to know that my daughter was a senior at Tulane when Katrina hit. And we spent a lot of time in your great city, but as mayor, I would say, as you leave the mayorship, you have left New Orleans far better than you inherited it. And I hope as a dean of the School of Public Service that you continue in public service. I hope you do that. And this is the first time at a Clinton School program that we've had the chair of the U.S. Conference of Mayors and the chair of the National League of Cities on the same program. You heard about that. And that's really a big deal. That's a real tribute to two great leaders. So I'd like to welcome Mayor Landrieu and Mayor Stodola to the stage. And joining them is my friend Donna Terrell. Donna Terrell is the anchor on Fox News. She is, I think, the city's greatest spokesperson in this issue of victory over violence, the campaign that Channel 4 and Channel 16 have done. And I think Donna, and I've seen her in action on many occasions, and she's done a great job with that and probably knows more about it than any average citizen in our city. She also is one of our great voices in fighting cancer, and she set such a positive role model for others. So Donna Terrell, Mayor Mitch Landrieu, and Mayor Mark Stodola on a discussion of violence in America's cities.
Thank you so much, Skip Rutherford. Thank you for the nice words. And thank you for a wonderful speech. We really enjoyed it. Thank you, Mayor Landrieu. And welcome to the stage, Mayor Stodola. It's good to be sitting here with you. We're going to go ahead and get started here. Mayor Landrieu, I know you are the president of U.S. Conference of Mayors. Mayor Stodola, you are the president of the National League of Cities. Can you briefly, and we all know that politicians are long-winded, so I am going to ask if you will briefly explain your organizations as they pertain to public safety.
That was the shortest speech I've ever given.
Really?
What are you talking?
It was a good speech.
Thank you. Very simply, there are, as you know, cities and counties across America. The U.S. Conference of Mayors is known as the conference of big cities. We represent cities of over 30,000 or more, but there are thousands of others that are smaller than that. So there are about 1,400 cities of 30,000 or more. There are about 350 of them that are in our organization. And we generally meet as a gathering place for mayors to share ideas about good things that are happening in their cities and to make sure that Congress either doesn't hurt us too badly or to ask Congress ways that they can help us.
And the National League of Cities represents cities and towns of all sizes. Everything from New York to the city of Rising, Arkansas, for example. So It's a bit broader in terms of some of the people that are with us today, some of my city directors that are with us, B.J. Wyrick and Director Doris Wright, and I saw our Vice Mayor, Kathy Webb, here earlier, giving a voice for those people who helped to guide us as mayors in terms of where we focus our efforts. So we're about 19,000 cities. We've got over 2,000 direct members, and obviously both organizations, and I've been in both, I am in both, are really there to teach best practices and advocacy as it relates to trying to get Congress to do the right thing usually.
Okay, all right, very good. Let's get right with the questions here. Mayor Landrieu, you kind of touched on the opioid epidemic. I wanted to talk about that because many of you remember this. Back in the 70s, the issue was heroin. And then in the 80s, it was crack cocaine. And so now we're talking about an opioid epidemic when this used to be a 20-year prison sentence. And that was when it really focused on mostly minority populations. Now the opioid epidemic affects white America. So now we have an epidemic as opposed to an issue where people just go to jail because they're taking drugs. How do we address that?
Well, first of all, the opioid crisis is catastrophic. The numbers that I just gave you on gun violence triple it on opioid. And evidently, although it started, where it specifically started, but where it affects white America, this is affecting everybody now across the country. It's a very serious problem. I just came back from Ohio, Dayton, Ohio. 566 people overdosed and died in Dayton, Ohio. Walked in a neighborhood, black and white, rich and poor, and it's, like all over the place. Secondly, heroin, cocaine, opioid, those are drugs. It's an addiction problem, not just a specific drug problem. And when you think about it from a public health side, as opposed to just a public safety side, it takes you into a completely non-judgmental era where you say, we've got to treat people, we're not going to put them in jail, then we've got to figure out how to get them off, then we got to figure out a pathway forward. All of those things are critically important, not to be glossed over. You asked a question about racism, is what you asked, not a question about drug treatment, which is important to deal with directly. It is a legitimate beef that back in the 60s, when it was primarily drugs or an epidemic in African American institutions, that we treated like a public safety issue rather than a public health issue. We all now know that that was wrong, that that is not correct. And the reason it's important to notice that now is because the Department of Justice on the federal level wants to actually go back to that. And that did not work. It didn't make any sense. We filled up our prisons. Recidivism rates remained high, but from my perspective, that was solely about race. That was not about public health. And that's why you can't make the same mistake again. Now, because we made the same mistake before doesn't argue in favor of making the same mistake now. Because you got it wrong with crack cocaine, now we have opioid, let's treat everybody like we did when we got it wrong. We have to recognize that what we did and how we handled that as a country was incorrect. This gets into criminal justice reform. It gets into racial reconciliation. It gets into a whole bunch of pathways. But let's not go back and make the same mistake that we made in the early 90s with heroin. Now, I would just one more thing. This is a very serious problem that is likely to get much, much worse before it gets better. And remember what I said, it's an addiction issue, not just opioid, because the drug will change. Fentanyl and its relationship to opioids, who's at fault, how we fix all of that stuff, lawsuits against pharmaceutical companies, and taking an all-out approach to fixing it, because it will course across every neighborhood in America if we don't get a handle on it soon.
Let me just add that the issue of opiate abuse, I suspect if I asked anyone out here to raise their hands if they knew somebody that was addicted to prescription medicine leading into heroin, I'd see several hands. I know we've all had tragedies that are they don't know the issues of race. It's not just about the distinction between crack cocaine and cocaine that we had in the 90s in terms of the federal government being unequal in the type of punishments that were going on. People young kids that have committed suicide because they can't get the mental treatment to get off of the drugs that they're addicted to. And the other thing that's interesting about it is that it's not a big city issue as opposed to a little city issue. My friend Steve Williams, the mayor of Huntington, West Virginia, one Friday night, there were 45 overdoses that his police department was called to. 45 in one single night. You go up into the Northeast, up into New Hampshire and Maine, and it's ravaging. It's ravaging those communities. So the issue is really treatment, and we're woefully underprepared to deal with the treatment issues. I had a chance a year ago to co-chair a national task force between the National Association of Counties and the National League of Cities to come up with a prescription for action. And on our website, we've got a prescription for local communities to be able to attack this issue. It starts with education and awareness. It starts with trying to make sure that our young people understand the terrible consequences. When some of these drugs are laced with fentanyl, it only takes one time, and they could be taking their life themselves because they don't understand the very, very huge addictive nature of this. Now, there's a whole raft of lawsuits that are going on now, and the state of Arkansas and the counties and the cities have all filed lawsuits. Hopefully, one of the derivatives of that is going to be a remedy that brings in the issue of treatment for these people that we have that are addicted to the drug.
Can I follow? Even if we get all of that right, I agree with everything what Mayor Stodola said. You don't want to just stop it. We need treatment facilities. We don't have enough. The lines are way too long. But there's a reason why people are becoming addicted. There's some underlying causes that are creating the need to do that, the need to use, that are not dissimilar from the same things that are underlying violence. They're not that different. And they're certainly not unattached to each other. And so again, like I said, with violence, treat it like a public health threat. What I mean by that is not just soft treatment. I mean doing really deep research to figure out. This is like Ebola. You remember when Ebola was coming? Everybody freaked out, right? Everybody's like, I am not going to get Ebola. And what did we do? We stopped, like the whole country stopped for a minute. When that patient hit the Dallas hospital, oh hell, everybody stopped. Remember that? Okay, well, violence is like a virus. Opioid addiction is like a virus. You have to treat it like that. If you just treat it like a public safety thing, which is I'm going to go get the dealer and I'm going to kill him, that's essentially what that theory is, then you're going to get what we have right now. You got to get much, much deeper. You got to know what you're talking about. You got to know what the strategy is. You have to put the money behind the strategy. Then you have to stop the bleeding so that you can unwind what the essential cause of it is.
Okay, thank you. We have a lot of service providers here. They participated in technical skills workshops to better be able to do the hard work that they do. One of the things that I have noticed as a news reporter is our community specifically, we have so many programs that are geared toward helping get kids off the street, helping adults get jobs, things that are supposed to eliminate some of the violence that we have in our community. But still, we have violence. So I'm wondering, where is the breakdown? What are we missing? Do we have enough programs? Do we have enough funding? Do we need more money? What is the problem, and why is there still a high number of violent crimes happening, even though we have these programs?
Well, think about how many times you checked your telephone, your cell phone today. Think about the fast action that we're all under in terms of our daily lives. The challenge, I don't know, is there's never enough money, okay? There's always need for more funding and all those kind of things. But the reality is that we're not stopping and taking the time to work with our young people and give them the direction and attention that an adult can give about a respect for people, a respect for the law, and a variety of those things. And we don't take the time. None of us take the time that we should to be able to spend quality time with kids to teach them some of these very, very important values. And so, these mentoring programs that we heard about today, if we could attach somebody to every child from 0 to 3 years old to give them the right basis to get into school, we would be seeing a real change ultimately. And I feel very strongly about that. Whether, I've come to the point of saying, well, maybe we need to just totally radically do something different with our educational system. We need to give our teachers a lot more money. We need to train them to be counselors. We need a whole lot more of them in the schools. They need to be able to sit there because it's the only regimen that our kids basically have is the requirement that they go to school. And if we can keep them in school and use those hours in a way that helps to teach some of these values, I think, that's maybe one option, but we're not taking the time. We're not taking the time individually.
I always wonder, too, about parents and parenting because, you have so many young people who are having children. Some of those young people were not really brought up very well. They didn't have very, very good examples. So how do you get to the parents so that you can get to the children? I mean, it's a vicious cycle.
Well, there are a couple of things. First of all, we need to do more of everything that we're doing. It's not, well, you're doing it and there's still violence, so quit doing what you're doing. Without being simplistic about it, we know that when a human being feels noticed, when they're loved, when they're nurtured, when they are healthy and they learn, they are much less likely to do bad stuff and much more likely to do good stuff. That's kind of just what it is. Now, if you ask your question, well, why aren't we loving our children? Why are babies having babies when they shouldn't be? Why are families breaking down as much as they do? Why are kids feeling forsaken? That's a much deeper dive. We ought to kind of think about that. Personal responsibility is always important. Personal responsibility is like number one. But there are people who grow up in environments where it would be almost impossible for them to exercise anything other than what they're doing right now. And I can just tell you, because I've done a lot of work, especially with young boys of color shooting each other, killing and being killed. That's where I've spent a lot of my time. Mostly when you go talk to these young men, when you get through all the garbage, all the gobbledygook, all the statistics, all the things that we adults talk about, I'm paraphrasing, but this is generally what I hear, is that, you know what, we feel forsaken. Nobody cares about us, nobody values us, and Mayor, out here, this is a quote, it's either kill or be killed. Now, I just would say back to the question about opioid and crack cocaine, who gets the benefit of the doubt will indicate whether or not you got a racial problem or not. And so if most white people had their teenage sons coming up to them and saying, I got a gun, I can get one anywhere I want, and mama, out here, I might not come home tonight, it's either kill or be killed, there would be hell to pay. I'm just telling you, there just would be. Because it's an expectation that these kids are that way, and they've always been that way. And of course, all of us know that that's not natural. And it's not necessarily reasonable. And I can tell you, my kids, they grow up in the poorest neighborhoods. Those kids that have found some kind of nurture and education and health have gone on to do great things, like become presidents of universities or become doctors. And so that's not rocket science. The harder part is trying to figure out how we change the culture. And I specifically do not mean things that get passed down from family to family through genetics. I do not mean that. I mean cultural patterns that develop, like when you get mad at me, you punch me in the mouth, as opposed to we say I'm sorry. That kind of pattern. And you've got to work, and Mark talked about this early, 0 to 3, brain development, really important. Early childhood education, really important. Mental health, availability early in the kid's life, conflict resolution classes, massive interventions, just like you would intervene when somebody was suffering from an illness. If you went to the doctor, I'm talking about one of my kids that had cancer, they didn't say, oh, let's think about this, we'll get to it later, we won't treat it right now. I mean, like all hands on deck now. Surgery, chemo, all of it, like now, to arrest the problem. You have to do that with every child as it relates to violence, and then things will change over time. We know this is possible because we saw this happen with cigarette smoking. We've seen this with other public health threats where we did these massive interventions. It works, but the wall is high, and the burden is pretty strong.
And Mayor Stodola, I know we do have some good programs in our community, and some of them are really making a difference. You know, even though I bring this up and I say there's still violence, we have some great programs in Little Rock.
We do, and one of the things that I think this session today was about was to make sure that we get people aware and educated about where to find these programs. You know, one of the biggest challenges we have is disorganization. You've got tons of programs out here, and they're stepping on each other. They don't know what other people are doing. And so I know we had a presentation on the Good Grid. We really think that some technology can help us really begin to inventory the programs that are good. If the evidence-based issues that are so very important, we get rid of the bad ones and we get some good ones. And we have to have metrics to see how we're reaching out to people.
Well,
so, that's been my biggest challenge is we got all these programs out here and they all are looking for money. They're all looking for funding. They're all wanting to help. And whether we can make them effective or not is the real opportunity that is before us.
And that leads me into my next question. Many of you know, if you watch Fox 16, we have a program called Victory Over Violence. And one of the things that we do a multitude of things to try to bring the community together. But in terms of some of those programs, you said there are lots of programs, lots of people who are doing good things. We try to bring some of those organizations and people together because it seems to me like it would work better. There's strength in numbers. So if you can bring more people together, working together, then you can have a better result. Having said that, this is the first time in 30 years of working in television news where I've worked at a station that's actually taken an active role in trying to help the violence issue in the community. What would you say, though, stations could do? What else can we do to make a difference? Because I do think some of the responsibility is on the TV stations that report on these horrible tragedies day in and day out.
Can I take a crack at that so you don't get in trouble with your TV and they run a bad story about you? Two things. One, I'm going to put my CEO hat on now. I'm a Democrat and I believe in government, but it needs to be rightly ordered and right-sized. And more money and more things is not always the answer. Government has a tendency to want to grow, and it has a tendency to want to just kind of get inefficient. Every day, you have to make sure that whatever it is that you're doing in your organization, you're efficient, you're engaged in best practices, you're discarding things that don't work, you have empirical data to support the things that do, and you measure your outcomes. We don't need everybody. We don't need duplication. It happens, but every day you got to work through, let's not duplicate, let's not step on each other, let's make sure we're focused in the right direction, let's make sure we're doing one team. That's the mayor's kind of responsibility, even though y'all don't all work for him, you kind of all do. In the sense that the mayor's office, I think, has the soft power to kind of demand that everybody is not just duplicating their efforts. So that's really important. And if you don't do that, what she's going to do in her job, because she has to, is come by your place and say, why are you wasting money and why aren't you having an impact? Because we're not here just to give you, the executive director, a job. I mean, it's not a jobs program. Don't let it become that. Make it an impact program. So that's my CEO speech. But on this issue, okay. I thought y'all were going to get mad at me because, focus on the outcome, not, what the process is. As it relates to TV stations, it's great. We've seen this in New Orleans too. A lot of stations have taken up the banner of trying to help, and they're good because you don't need a whole lot of impetus to show the kid on the ground with the hole in his head and everybody crying and all of that. What does have to happen though is showing positive images of individuals doing great things. That's really. It's really important because not to tell the truth, but in fact to tell the truth, because sometimes if it bleeds, it leads. You know that, you've heard that, and I'm not saying that that's not something that has to be done, but if every image is of something negative, like people think, oh my God, like right now, I'll bet y'all all think that Mardi Gras is just about Bourbon Street. Isn't that true? When y'all think about Mardi Gras, don't you think about people getting out the way on Bourbon Street doing stupid things, something that you want to go to but you wouldn't send your kids to? You know what I mean? But Mardi Gras mostly is a family event. It's like a family picnic. It's beautiful. It's completely different that the image that you have on TV, because they just, not you, not Arkansas, but everybody in the country, just replays the same thing all the time. What's the real truth that's going out in the community, positive and negative, gives people good feelings about themselves, and then they'll model that behavior. You can help there as well. And then finally, support the work in public service announcements that, you know, these good organizations are doing to let people know that there's actually a pathway out that makes a lot of sense.
Let me add into that too, because you have a great responsibility. The media, I don't think appreciates or realizes the consequence of how they form the images that people have of their community. And when I was a prosecutor for 3 terms, and I remember your television station, Channel 4 back then, if it bleeds, it leads, okay? And
okay, you just said 4, we're 16. I just want to clarify
I
that.
know.
With the bleeds, it leads.
Well, you're a
thing.
sister station, okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, the victory over violence, I think, is being carried on by both of the sister stations. But my point is that there's a tremendous responsibility that you have that I don't think is, maybe it is appreciated, maybe it's just driven by ratings. But for every homicide that you show on the TV, you ought to be showing one of these organizations that's doing something good to try and save a kid. Because you beat people down, you beat a community down. And if all 3 stations or 4 stations are doing it, it's very, very difficult for people to start seeing hope. I'll give you an example. 2 weeks ago in U.S. News and World Report, the city of Little Rock was ranked as the number 38th most livable city in the United States. We beat out Atlanta, we beat out Chattanooga, we beat out Nashville, we beat out all sorts of cities. Did I ever see an article about that? Not one. Not one. So I'm saying, and so what we do hear about, well, it's, oh golly, Little Rock must be one of the most violent cities in the country. And certainly we've got an issue that we have in terms of challenge. And I know New Orleans has it, Nashville's got a serious problem, Louisville's got a serious problem, but I don't see that kind of responsibility and balance. So if you really want to know what I think, that's what I think.
And I appreciate hearing that. And I thank you, those of you who are applauding. What I find very, very interesting, though, is we do positive stories. And for some reason, people don't hear those positive stories because we get phone calls all the time from people saying exactly what you're saying and what you're applauding for. But anyway, I just find that very, very interesting because
maybe it's that they're into the newscast and people have already fallen asleep.
The positive stories just kind of, maybe that's it. But there are positive stories. But anyway, having said that, let's move on and talk about police recruiting. Mayor Stodola, I know we've had issues. Things are getting better now, but we were at a deficit in terms of getting police officers. I know this is not a Little Rock problem. This is a problem all across the country. Mayor Landrieu, you say you have it too. So how do we combat that? How do we make people want to be police officers?
Well, you have to be very aggressive. You got to work in the schools. We're working with Superintendent Mike Poore and our vocational tech programs, and we've got people that are actually learning about being a police officer and the profession of being police officers or firefighters. Just so people know, we hired 81 police officers last year. We've got 25 vacancies. We hired a class of 18 in February, but it's a constant issue. You have retirements and resignations that go on every day, and so you got to keep that aggressiveness out there and really train them about the professionalism of the department. The tensions that have occurred in this community, I say this community, I mean around the nation, on the issue of how police officers and communities interrelate, certainly makes it difficult to recruit officers. And they're putting their lives on the line every single day, and they're going, man, is this worth it? And so we face that. We have got to continue. The more and more we can get people to work on community policing and what we know are the proper 21st century policing approaches to working with communities, I think makes that job a much better job.
Your city.
Well, first of all, it's a nationwide problem. Lots of cities are having trouble hiring police officers. We're in a really tough moment for our country on criminal justice reform, on police reform, on use of force initiatives, on how police departments see young African American men. We have incidences all the time that are in the press that we talk about. And we've had a number of not only police involved shootings with police shooting citizens, but also a number of police officers that have been shot themselves. And it's not a great time, people say, to be a police officer. And so we have to work through that. When we hire train and supervise officers in community policing, they have to feel like they're respected as well. If you ask police officers, they say, well, they think all of us are bad because some of us have done bad things. And that's just not true. Most police officers are good folks. I've buried 6 police officers since I've been here. Their work is really dangerous. But it is also true that a very significant number of police officers have done the wrong thing with the use of force in the country. And there really hasn't been as open and transparent a process to make sure that justice has been done in situations where a shooting was justified or not justified. And we've gone through that discussion in the community. And so police officers are saying, I don't really want to go. And you really have to recruit hard and make sure you hire, train, and supervise at the right time. We have hired in the last 8 years over 400 police officers. But as many, almost as many, have retired. So we're even to where we are. Now, firefighting is a little bit different. In this sense, I have a bucket load of people that want to be firefighters. I have a long, long, long list. Not that it's not a dangerous profession, but there must be another reason why they would prefer to do that than to be police officers. And this is going to be a challenge going forward. Also, the economy's changing fairly dramatically. And if it's like any other job, you have to make it attractive. And you either have to do that by workforce conditions, reduce the risk, increase the pay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't think that we're going to get out of this soon. But every mayor in America is battling with this particular challenge as we speak.
And since we're on the issue of police officers, let's talk a little bit about community policing. We hear that phrase a lot. Still, there's a disproportionate number of Black boys and men who are being killed. You touched on this just a minute ago. What do we do to make people of color feel more comfortable with police officers?
So in New Orleans, we're under police consent decree right now because you may remember after Katrina, you heard of something called the Danziger Bridge accident. There were a whole bunch of other police-involved shootings. Poorly hired, poorly trained, poorly supervised officers. We've completely changed that in New Orleans. The community used to have a 23% approval rating of the police department. Now it's 75%. Retrained our police officers on use of force. Retrained it on how you stop and frisk in a way that's constitutional, so you're not just throwing everybody up against the wall just because it happens to be a young Black kid. Distinguishing people based on their behavior and not their race. All of those things are critically important. There's a heartbreaking story in the New York Times today, though. Now, Mayor de Blasio in New York has really worked hard on community policing. But there was this young man who had mental problems that was walking up and down the street with either a pipe or something else and started to push on people. And a group of police officers that were not from the neighborhood showed up, and I think what the paper reported was that he occupied a stance that looked like he was going to try to shoot at him. He had a metal pipe maybe, and they shot him. And the article was about, well, community policing doesn't work. I don't think that's correct. I think it does. What the problem was is that the officers that are responding to emergencies are not the same ones that are in the community, so that's a different thing. So we need more police officers, not less. I know people say, oh, I'm mad at the police, I don't want them around. We actually need more of them. But they need to be trained in a way where they actually know the neighbors, and then their responses have to be in the neighborhoods where they are, because I think the article, this is a heartbreaking thing, everybody who in the neighborhood knew that he wasn't dangerous except the police officers that shot him. So we're going to go through this for a while until we really insist on getting better. In the speech that I gave you a statistic that I may have run by too quickly, but in the late 90s, the federal government actually was a massive participant in community policing. They spent billions of dollars, about $4 billion a year. The wall cost $25 billion. This was $4 billion a year. I'm just giving you something to think about. The wall cost $25 billion. It's supposed to keep us safe. All right? For $4 billion a year, we hired 100,000 police officers. Now, if the crime is not coming over the wall, and the crime is on the streets of America, and $25 billion, that's like where you fishing in a pond where the fish are not. I mean, we fish here. That's like your fishing god saying, let's go fish someplace where the fish are not and spend all your money over there. But there's a whole school of fish, but we're not going over there. And by the way, I got some shrimp and some crabs, and there's a big redfish. We're not going over there. That's what it's like. And so for $4 billion a year, we had 100,000 police officers. President Clinton did this. Y'all remember him? He did this, and actually, notwithstanding the part of the crime bill that we don't like, about the 3 strikes you're out, that part didn't work. The part that did work on cutting murders in half was the community policing and the weed and seed program, and Congress has cut that funding by 88%. So when the president gets mad at cities, this president particularly, for having crime, and they cut your money, that's like somebody stealing your lunch money or your peanut butter and jelly sandwich and then blaming you for being hungry. It's not the same. I mean, that's just wrong, and that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I would add that every officer should be a community policing officer. The reality is that in order to cover the territory that we have, we got 125 square miles is what our city is, and when you begin to put the mobile units in place and you begin to figure out all the other special units and you begin to figure out all the events that go on in our city, which takes a tremendous amount of resources, you realize that the ability to community police, which means officers on bicycles, it means officers walking neighborhoods, it means getting out of your police car and spending a little bit of time so that the neighborhoods know that you're there. Those are the kind of things that you got to have, and so you got to have the funding to do that. You have to have the funding to do that. When President Clinton actually put in that 100,000 police officers, that made a huge difference. So that's issue number one. And then as our police officers interact with the community, we've got to make sure that we've got them professionally trained as it relates to that. As you know, we've got people who think that every one of our police officers has to live in the city of Little Rock, and that if they magically live in the city of Little Rock, we're not going to have these issues. And that's not true. That's not true. I mean, that doesn't change what's in a person's heart and in a person's mind. You've got to have proper training for your police officers. So we just funded some cultural training and cultural competency training. We do that with our police departments. We've done it in the past, but it wasn't given the significance from an identification standpoint that it is now, in terms of how do you deal with people that maybe you don't associate with every single day of the week? How do you work in neighborhoods? And so that is critically important, and that's a whole new level of training that our police officers are working on, and our leadership is. As a matter of fact, Mayor Landrieu and I are going to be visiting with our police chiefs and mayors this next week, talking about these issues about how do we make sure that we're doing the right job in terms of the cultural reflection of the community in our police departments.
Well, Mayor Stodola and Mayor Landrieu, I think we have run out of time. We could sit here and chat all day, but I do have one more question. And Mayor Landrieu, that is for you. There is a rumor that you are considering a run for president. And it sounds like we have a group in this audience that would vote for you. So having put that out there, could you elaborate a little bit? We want to break some news here.
Okay. Mascaro in New Orleans, you say, don't believe any rumors unless you hear them from me.
That's it. Exactly.
Thank you very much. It's very nice of you. I hear those rumors too. I'm not starting them. As you know, I'm at the end of a 30-year political career, having, as the Mayor Stodola mentioned, rebuilt a broken city. So I'm tired. So I'm going to take a rest for a while. I don't intend to run for president. People have spoken. It's really wonderful to have your name mentioned. I'd be lying if I didn't tell you that it stoked your ego a little bit, for people to think that you could do that job. I do think the country needs to go in a different direction. Quickly. I don't think there's going to be a dearth of candidates who are going to try to get us in the right direction. I'm not intending to be that person right now. In politics, you never say never. You don't know where you're going to be. You don't know what God wants you to do in years to come. But it would surprise me if that happened. But thank y'all. If I run, I'll call you and get at least. I get at least 5 or 6 votes in Little Rock. So thank you so much.
All right.
Mayor
Thank
Landrieu,
you, Mayor
thank you
Landrieu.
so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Take care of yourself.
Really great. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.